welcome to the Deep Dive.
Hello.
Today we're tackling a really tough subject, one that many of you will unfortunately remember, the Watts family murders.
That's right. We've gathered quite a bit of source material here, detailed accounts, reporting, investigation summaries.
All focused on those awful events in Frederick, Colorado, back in August 2018.
Involving Christopher Watts, his wife Shanann, who was pregnant, and their two little girls, Bella and Celeste.
And our mission today, like always, is to really dig into this specific material we have in front of us.
Exactly. We want to pull out the key information, the insights, maybe even the contradictions presented within these sources. We're not going beyond what's written here.
Okay, so let's get into it. The sources start by, setting the scene. Christopher Lee Watts and Shanann Catherine Ruzichek.
Originally from North Carolina, the sources say, they met around 2010, got married in 2012.
And their daughters, Bella Marie, born late 2013, and Celeste Catherine Cece, born July 2015.
And a really crucial point the sources make right away. Shanann was 15 weeks pregnant with a boy.
Nico. He's often counted as a third murder victim in these accounts.
The family lived in Frederick, Colorado. Nice house, 5 bedrooms, bought in 2013.
But one of the first details these sources bring up adds a layer, doesn't it? They declared bankruptcy in 2015?
It does. That detail about the bankruptcy, it suggests maybe things weren't quite as smooth sailing financially as they might have looked on the surface, at least a few years prior.
And their jobs. Christopher worked for Anadarko Petroleum.
Right, and Shanann worked from home. She was selling a product called Thrive for Lavelle, which the source describes as a multi-level marketing company. She was apparently quite active on social media promoting it.
So you have this picture of family life, maybe some financial stress underneath. And then we get to Monday, August 13th, 2018.
Shanann gets home really early, like 1:48 a.m. from a business trip. Her friend Nicole Atkinson drops her off.
Chris had been home with the girls that weekend.
And what the source material highlights next is how quickly things felt wrong to Nicole.
Yeah, later that same day, Shanann misses a doctor's appointment, doesn't answer texts or calls.
Which, according to Nicole in these accounts, was very unlike Shanann. Very unusual.
So Nicole gets worried. Around, 12:10 p.m., the source says. She goes to the house.
Gets no answer. So she calls Chris, who's at work, and then she calls the police. Asks for a welfare check.
Okay, so the police arrive about 1:40 p.m. Chris shows up too, lets them in.
And the sources detail what they find inside. The family dog is there, totally fine.
Shanann's purse is there. Keys, medicine inside.
Her phone is found, kind of tucked between the couch cushions.
And her car is in the garage. Crucially, the girls' car seats are still in it.
And one detail the sources really emphasize, something investigators apparently noted immediately, Shanann's wedding ring.
Found on the bedside table, which, given she just got back from a trip, seemed off.
Right, and then you have this really jarring contrast presented in the sources.
What Chris is telling the police versus what he's doing publicly.
Exactly. He tells the police he last saw Shanann around 5:15 a.m. when he left for work, claims she was still in bed.
But then, later that day, he's giving interviews to Denver TV crews right outside the house.
Pleading for his family's return, saying he wants them back.
While police and search dogs are literally right there, working the scene behind him, you can sometimes hear the dogs in that footage, the sources reference.
It's a stark image described in the material. The FBI and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, the CBI, they joined the case the very next day, August 14th.
Things moved fast. The source material points to August 15th as the major turning point.
The polygraph test.
Yes, he was given a polygraph. The sources state clearly he failed it.
And failing that test seems to be what led directly to his confession.
According to the accounts, he first confessed something to his father, who was actually there at the station.
And then to the authorities. But this initial confession, it was horrific, but it wasn't the truth? Or at least not the whole story, as investigators would come to understand it.
Right. His first story, documented here, was that he killed Shanann after finding she had smothered the girls.
He claimed he saw Bella already dead on her bed via the baby monitor, then walked in to find Shanann actively strangling Celeste.
And that, in a rage, he strangled Shanann.
A truly awful claim. He was arrested based on that confession right then, August 15th.
But that story didn't hold. The source material then describes the grim process of finding the bodies.
After confessing, Watts actually marked the locations on a photo of the Anadarko oil site where he worked.
And on August 16th, they found them. Shanann was buried in a shallow grave nearby.
And the daughters. Their bodies were discovered inside separate, large crude oil storage tanks.
The sources share some really disturbing specific details here, how the girls' bodies were put in there.
They had to be pushed through these hatches at the top of the tanks, only about 8 inches in diameter.
The material notes Bella had scratches, and a piece of her hair was found near the hatch, indicating, well, the difficulty and force involved.
It's incredibly grim. And the sources clarify that later, Chris did admit to smothering both girls himself with his bare hands.
Contradicting that initial story he told after the polygraph.
Completely. So let's look at the charges filed, detailed in the sources. On August 21st.
3 counts of first-degree murder. The sources specify 1 count was after deliberation, meaning premeditated for Shanann.
And 2 counts were for murdering a child under 12 by someone in a position of trust for Bella and Celeste.
Plus, unlawful termination of a pregnancy for Nico.
And 3 counts of tampering with the deceased human body for hiding the remains.
The sources also mentioned he was fired by Anadarko pretty much immediately by the day he was arrested, and denied bail.
Now, a really critical piece of evidence the sources highlight came out a bit later, in November 2018.
The neighbor's security camera.
Yes. Footage from the early morning of August 13th after Shanann got home.
What did it show?
It showed Chris loading a red gas can into his work truck, and then significantly backing the truck up towards or into the garage.
And the importance of that, as the sources explain it.
Well, it totally contradicted his story that Shanann had just, taken the girls and left sometime that morning.
Right. Why would he be backing his truck into the garage like that, loading things, if they just left on their own?
Exactly. Police believed this footage captured him loading the bodies for transport. It showed he was lying about his movements and actions right from the start.
The sources also briefly touch upon the wider context. The crime being labeled a family annihilation or familicide.
Yeah, and they mention a media observation at the time that statistically, August sometimes sees a spike in such crimes, though the reasons are complex and debated.
And they note it's relatively rare for family annihilators not to die by suicide afterwards.
Though Watts himself, according to these accounts, later claimed he did contemplate suicide out of guilt.
Okay, this is where the source material gets really complex, the motive, the sequence of events. Because the sources document different stories coming from Watts or attributed to him over time.
That's a key takeaway from these documents, isn't it? The shifting narrative.
Absolutely. First, there's the account relayed by his own lawyer during a Dr. Phil interview, as reported in the sources.
Right. In that version, the lawyer claimed Watts confessed he killed Shanann first after they had an argument about wanting a divorce.
And that Bella then walked in on him after Shanann was dead. He told her mommy was sick.
According to that account, he then put Shanann's body and the still-alive girls into the truck without their car seats, drove to the oil site, and smothered the girls there, one after the other. Celeste first, then Bella.
So that version puts Shanann's murder first, triggered by an argument.
Then contrast that with what the sources report about confessions Chris Watts allegedly made later to a pen pal, detailed in a June 2021 Inside Edition piece.
It's a completely different scenario.
Totally. In this pen pal account, Watts supposedly claimed he'd been planning the murders for weeks.
Planning.
He reportedly claimed he gave Shanann the painkiller OxyContin, hoping it would cause a miscarriage. His thinking, allegedly, was that ending the pregnancy would make it easier for him to be with his girlfriend, Nicole Kessinger.
Wow. And what about the children in that version?
He also supposedly confessed in those letters that he first tried to smother the girls in their beds at home that morning before Shanann died, but failed, and only succeeded later at the oil site.
So you go from an initial confession blaming Shanann to a lawyer's account of a spontaneous rage killing of Shanann after a divorce argument, to these later reported claims of weeks of planning, targeting the pregnancy, and even attempting to kill the girls at home first.
Exactly. The source material lays out these contradictory narratives attributed to Watts himself. It really underscores the difficulty in pinning down a single consistent account of his motive or the exact sequence from him. Each version seems to serve a different purpose, perhaps.
Let's move to the legal outcome as documented in the sources. He ended up pleading guilty.
Yes. On November 6, 2018, he pleaded guilty to all counts.
And the sources explain that the death penalty was taken off the table.
At the request of Shanann's family, actually. They supported the plea deal, reportedly to avoid a long, painful trial and appeals process.
Sentencing was November 19, 2018.
The sources detail it. 5 life sentences without possibility of parole. 3 consecutive, 2 concurrent.
Plus extra time, 48 years for unlawfully terminating the pregnancy.
And 36 years total for the 3 counts of tampering with bodies. Sentence started immediately.
And he wasn't kept in Colorado long, right? The sources mentioned security concerns.
That's right. By early December 2018, he was moved out of state to Dodge Correctional Institution in Wisconsin, where the sources indicate he remains.
Finally, the sources touch on the aftermath, the massive media attention.
Oh, huge. TV specials, you had 2020, HLN, Dr. Phil featuring the lawyer, Dr. Oz featuring the neighbor, Nicole Atkinson.
And documentaries, too. Oxygen did one called Criminal Confessions.
And probably the most well-known, the Netflix documentary, American Murder, The Family Next Door.
Which the sources note used a lot of archival footage, social media, police body cams, texts.
Giving it a very immediate, almost real-time feel. The sources also mention a Lifetime movie was made.
And that Shanann's family publicly spoke out against that movie adaptation.
Yeah. The sheer volume of media coverage just shows how much this case gripped the public consciousness. That contrast between the curated online image and the horrifying reality.
So wrapping up this deep dive, we've traced the story as presented in these specific source materials, from the family background and those hints of financial trouble.
Through the disappearance, the initial investigation, the lies, the failed polygraph.
The awful discoveries, the different confessions, the charges, the neighbors' crucial footage.
And finally the plea, the sentence, and the media storm.
And looking at all this information, especially those conflicting narratives from Watts himself documented right here in these sources, it really highlights something, doesn't it?
It really does. It shows how trying to understand a case like this, just from the available material, requires, careful attention. You have to look at the documented facts, the evidence, like the video, but also acknowledge the inconsistencies, especially when they come from the perpetrator.
It's about mapping what the sources tell us, even if they present a puzzle.
Precisely.
So a final thought for you, based purely on what we've discussed from these sources. Given Christopher Watts' documented shifting stories, blaming Shanann first, then the divorce fight story via his lawyer, then the later pen pal claims of weeks of planning involving OxyContin and targeting the children first, what does this source material itself suggest about the sheer challenge of ever definitively knowing the why or a precise how in a case like this, even with a guilty plea?
What parts of the story, as laid out here, still leave you wondering about what really happened inside that house on August 13th, 2018? Something to definitely think about.